All right, Dan, thanks for doing this. Could you just give a brief little intro, kind of where you're at right now? And then we can just roll right into the paper.
Sure. Currently, I'm the director of sports medicine at Lawrence Memorial Hospital in Lawrence, Kansas. I previously was, 2004 to 2005, I did the Duke University Sports PT Fellowship. From there, I was assistant athletic trainer PT for the Chiefs. I left that. I had a private practice for 7 years, had 3 clinics in 7 years. And then I said came to the LMH job in about 2018. So that's probably the fastest way to summarize things right now, I suppose.
Perfect. And then could you kind of explain like why you decided to write this paper with Steve, and then we can kind of just go straight into what you're identifying as the problem.
Sure. Well, first off, thanks everybody for coming really early on a Saturday morning. I know, I'm guessing probably had to drag some people out of bed and everything. What can I say? I'm a dad with kids who have games and practices on Saturday morning, so it makes it difficult for me. So I appreciate it. But anyway, really, this started, the evolution of this paper has been well over a decade. I knew Steve just from professional interactions and stuff, and he's in the Wayne State Athletic Department in Michigan, outside Detroit, or in Detroit, I should say. And he kind of, we started this discussion, like, I feel like we should have like an actual progression. I think so many of us, I mean, how often do you see either a protocol or you hear somebody in a meeting and they say something, don't go too fast, or, well, take your time, take it easy. Right. Here's a great example. So, and I'm going to talk about this at CSM. I had a strongman competitor who ruptured it. I'm getting to my point here. Just give me a second. He had a distal biceps rupture, and his previous best was 900 pounds in a deadlift. And, his doctor, he's like, well, when can I get back to, lifting heavy? And he's like, well, don't go too fast. Well, what does that mean? How do we quantify that? What's too fast for a strongman who deadlifted 900 pounds previously? So what I'm trying to say is that so much of what we do is arbitrary. Well, let's just see how you feel, So we tried to put some degree of not only objectivity, but a specific progression for people, not only, day to day, like back to practice, but also as we all are experiencing, I'm guessing, with declining insurances, limited visits, the further people get out, they need to reduce their time away from us for whatever reason. They've maximized their benefits. Mom and dad can't afford it anymore. We wanted some structure for people that are on their own, so it's not so arbitrary. And also, too, I think from doing this for over 20 years as a therapist, people will, oh, I felt good, and then they amp it up too fast, and then they're either sore or their knee is swollen, and then they're in good spirits, and then they just crash, right? Because they're like, oh, I'm never going to get back. Well, what this does, much like an interval throwing program or a walk jog program, this allows people to have a degree of control over, I'm good. Well, maybe this irritated my knee a bit, or I got to this stage and boy, I was out of shape. So I need to, this is where my level is right now, and I need to get to that next. So I think really that was kind of the point of trying to do this. And believe me when I tell you, it was years of tinkering with this and basically using patients as lab rats. And you hand it to them and they come back. And that's why, for example, when you see in the very first stage, the first 2 steps are untimed, people were just too out of shape to handle a timed work rest ratio. They just didn't have it. So there was a degree of, again, you try something, right? You tinker and you fail, right? So there was a degree of people just needed to get the runs in, not necessarily with the work rest ratios that we were seeking. So that's why those first 2 were untimed, because we felt there was some value in accomplishing something. So anyway, I'll stop there. I hope that gives you an idea of how it got started and kind of the evolution of it. But it was quite serendipitous that the article was actually published in April of 2020, just as everybody was having to cut loose all of their patients because of COVID. So
Because it's been a while since it's been published, have any of your thoughts about kind of the recommendations in this paper changed? And has there been any like arguments or pushback from people, either researchers or clinicians, about it?
well, I mean, I've had some strength coaches have said, that's a lot of volume for sprinting. And I'm like, well, the operative word in the title, return to sprinting. It's building a repeated sprint ability. It's building fitness again. It's buying us time as therapists. People are chomping at the bit to get back. And I think they find out that it's one thing to run hard for, 20 yards, but to do it over and over again at a high level takes another level of fitness. And another level of conditioning. So there's that piece. I get a lot of questions about, well, what about adding cutting in? I'm like, well, you can add that in. That's fine. I mean, it's whoever's in front of you, right? This isn't, I understand that this is a straight linear, progression. There's no change of direction. There's no random cutting. This is all pre-planned. I understand all that. I think you add that stuff in as you see fit. If you want to use the same distances and add some 45-degree turns, and then that kind of thing, that's fine. I think you prescribe it individually to who's in front of you. But I think the whole purpose of this, getting back to it, was you only get to see this person once a month or what have you. They need some sort of structure. No different than if I write out a weightlifting program for them, and I tell them, hey, here's your quad exercise, here's your hamstring exercise, here's your proximal hip. Pick 2 or 3 in each category, 3 to 4 sets. 6 to 10 reps or something along those lines. We give them some structure. I feel it's the same thing, but just for conditioning. So I don't know. The way you asked that question, is there something you're really wanting to say?
No, I'm curious as to, like, always when researchers or clinicians publish something, is there pushback for any reason? But
you know what? It's funny, man. I mean, I always find it funny that I welcome the pushback. Like, use it, tinker with it. If you think it stinks, republish something else and say, here's where Lorenz and Debzowski failed. I mean, I don't have a problem with that. Somebody's got to start the discussion, right? I think it's kind of like the same argument with FMS or SFMA or any of these other things. Like, people are so quick to say why it's bogus or why it's not workable or all the flaws. Well, then you publish something, then you do it. Or the people that shout the most, but you do a PubMed search. It's like, interesting. I don't see your name on PubMed. It's so quick. It's life in general, right? There's always the first thing they want to do is cut you down. So, I mean, I haven't had a lot of that. Maybe it's happening behind the scenes. Maybe people are saying I'm a charlatan. Who the heck knows? But, hey, put yourself out there and start the discussion, I guess, is the way I look at it.
Sweet. So maybe we go into, before you start stage 1 of this progression, what are kind of the things you want to see happen from the kind of the LSI, the hop, and then the walk jog? What does that look like?
Well, the strength, really, I think that Berge paper in BJSM talked about, return to running, what most people use. I mean, for a lot of years, I used a step down test, as just kind of a litmus test for if they're ready to run. It was a quality and a quantity concern for me. I really wanted symmetry in that, prior to getting going. Now, 10, 15 years ago, I didn't have a handheld dynamometer, so I didn't have a way to really be more objective in my strength testing. So I admit, I mean, it was largely a clinical feel. It was watching them perform, with the exercises that we did. And that's kind of what I got him back to. But I think the 75% strength of the quads and hamstrings is a reasonable starting point. But leading up to that, like I said, is a walk jog progression, because and I try out of the gate as much as I can to get fitness stuff in. But right now I have the ability to do that. We have a upper body ski erg, we have battle ropes and things like that, where we're doing, conditioning once they can weight bear out of the gate. So, we're doing that stuff early, but, not every clinician has the ability to do that, with the resources they have. So building a fitness base is really important. Any of you that have treated an ACL, sometimes, and I'm just picking ACL, but take any post-op, that first time they jog from one end of the clinic to the other, it's like, you got to get the AED, right? So that's why the walk jog progression to me is a good starting point, to get them, again, confidence, a baseline level of fitness. And then the idea is that most of our athletes are going back to anaerobic sports that, have different, there's different, there's low intensity, moderate, and maximum, and they do all of those. Very few of our athletes with this progression are going back to steady state. Not all of our athletes are marathoners with steady state, right? So that's why I did this, or why we did this, with the work rest ratios, and tried to be as specific as we could.
Cool. Do you have a specific walk jog like template that you hand to patients or athletes, or is it like
I do, yes. It's one that, honestly, it's just one that we use from online. I've been using it for years, it was from a running article, and there's a number of them, 2 minutes on, 2 minutes off, 2 minutes on, 5 minutes off. I don't really care. The point is that there's a walk jog progression that goes from more walk, less jog to more jog, less walk. I mean, to me, that's kind of the point. And the one we have goes to basically 20 to 30 minutes of straight jogging at steady state. If you don't think that's necessary, that's fine. I still, is there a way to say, well, is 15 enough? Is 20 enough? I don't have that answer. I really don't. But to me, it's worked when we've been tinkering with this for, like I said, over a decade, and we seem to have good results with it. So that's what we went with. But if you told me that there's a better way, totally receptive to that.
With that walk jog, and then with some of these, I guess maybe all three stages, how much of this are you doing in clinic versus how much of this is like prescribed for them outside of the clinic? Is it
not a bit of it is in clinic?
Okay. None of this
all outside.
Okay.
Again, this isn't if I got 1 or 2 days a week, one every other week with people, I want my time to be maximized with the stuff they can't do on their own, or the coaching, or whether it's movement retraining with landing, or landing from a box and absorbing impact, working on sprint technique. That's the stuff I want to be spending my time on. Progressing exercises. Hey, we went from this, now we're moving to this. That's where I want to spend my time. So this is something that is, I of course give me opportunity to ask questions, but this is something they're completely doing on their own. I'm not going to spend clinic time on this. They have their Apple Watch, or they have their phone, they have a stopwatch, whatever they have, they know what they're supposed to do. They go out to their field or wherever they run, and they could do this on their own.
Makes sense. Okay, so stage 1, can you kind of lay out what that criteria to begin looks like? Well, we kind of already did, but like the objectives, and then the queuing for this first stage, what that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, we want them at about 50% intensity, like a little more than a jog. That's kind of the cues that I've used. The idea is that you're picking up the pace a little bit. Certainly at this phase, because how early it is, they probably don't have that soft tissue compliance, like inflection. So certainly their active range should be where it's at, but at a 50% pace, you're not getting that heel to glute like you would like in an A skip type situation. So I don't necessarily need full flexion at this point. But the idea is we are picking up our pace from our walk jog progression. And there is a degree of, I think there's a degree of kind of that, you call it kinesthetic awareness, maybe sensory perception of, okay, this is definitely elevated from a jog, but I'm not at a sprint. Right. So they kind of know they learn how to self-prescribe, so to speak. So I think that's where this is at. Again, their fitness levels are pretty low. That's why the jog, it's at a 50% intensity of their perceived level of intensity. And the key here again is to complete the runs in the work rest ratios given. Obviously the work rest ratios are a little narrower because we're trying to increase their fitness. I do believe, again, just from energetics, that we have to increase the tank, so to speak. And that's what we're doing in this phase, I believe.
Hey, Dan, just real
Hey,
quick
Nate.
question. How you doing, man?
Good. I was wondering if that was you, and then I was like, oh, that is him. Okay.
Yeah. So like, how would you like implement this like in someone's like training, like weekly session frequency stuff? So like, does it matter if they do it on the same days that they're doing like their lifting stuff, or if they do it on the off days? Does it even matter?
I mean, to me, I'd prefer off days, but I don't know how many days a week they're giving me. Like, for example, I had a professional volleyball player not too long ago. She was rehabbing both for a slap repair and an FAI. And again, she was driving a ways to see me, and she was training on her own at a gym. And, she's like, can you write something out for me? And I'm like, well, sure, of course, and not this sprint progression, but well, how many days a week are you going to do? And she said, well, this week I only got 2. Next week I could do 4. So, I mean, it's like, I got to find that out. If I have to do it on the same day, it's always after the lifting
Sure.
for me, especially the early phases. Now that flips if I'm in the late stage with the sprinting. If I'm in the final stage and I'm at max intensity sprinting, I want to do that part first and then probably lift after, because I don't want that central nervous system fatigue to kick in. But if I have perfect world scenario, they're lifting 2 or 3 days a week, and on their off days, they're doing this. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
Any disagreement with that, or any pushback, or any thoughts otherwise?
I mean, yeah, I didn't know if you want to do it on the same day or different day. And I mean, I can kind of see why, like on a separate day, they're a little bit more prepared, they're fresh, and like that's the focus of today's kind of rehab or training. Or whereas if it's the same day, you're like, I got done this lift and I don't want to go to the field and start running,
Well, I think there's a degree too of load tolerance and capacity at this point, because if you lift and then run, and then you have a reactive knee, and I think sometimes as a clinician, and you're like, well, which one was it? Was it the lifting? Was it the running? Was it the combo of both on the same day? As much as I can, I try and eliminate the variables. So if they're not reactive, if they don't like, okay, so if I lift Monday, they run Tuesday, they lift again, or they take Wednesday off, or lift again Wednesday, what have you, and they run again Thursday, take whatever your schedule is, and their knee, and I check a fusion every visit that I see them, that I can see them, to see if there's any. Remember, up to a centimeter and change in a fusion is actually considered normal, but I want to talk to them about, okay, was your quad sore or was your knee sore? Because if the knee itself is sore, the joint, well, okay, we may have, made it a bit angry, but also it tells us what their capacity is too. But if I do it on the same, it's kind of like, the analogy I would give is you do a couch to 5K and you run 2 miles on your first training day. Not to say that you could tolerate it, but then your knee is really sore. Well, was it the 2 miles that you just ran too far, or you did too much that first day, or that you ran at all, right? So I think if they show me that they can do it on alternative days and not be reactive, and then we went to a day where they lifted and then ran, I think that would be, I'd rather see that first prior to doing it on the same day. But like I said, if they're doing the higher speed stuff, like the final stage, to me, if I have to do it on the same day, I'm doing that before the lifting. Because to me, the first stages of the 50% intensity is more conditioning. I want them in the weight room giving me what they can give me. But the late stage, because it's higher speed, you don't want fatigue. If you're really trying to be train fast to be fast, as they say, if there's any kind of fatigue there, you're not really getting the benefit of getting back to full speed sprinting, if that makes sense.
Oh, I gotcha. All right, thanks.
Yeah, Dan, one, thanks for coming on. But another thing, I thought it was interesting, like just starting in with the paper, I was like, wow, this is, just the general lower limb injury, I mean, so we're talking the whole gamut. And so I guess my brain wasn't working when we were going through the earlier section, talking about like the criteria to start a program like this. Do you feel like, I guess, like, what else were you maybe like keeping in mind? I'm not like, this isn't a loaded question, but do you feel like, like the limb symmetry, the single leg squat, and like a hop test, are like solid qualifiers across, the full like lower limb injury? Or I guess, were there some tests or some criteria you we're maybe on the fence of including in something like this.
Your point's a good one in that, I've got the question before, is this what you use for a hamstring return to sport? I mean, understand that when we did this, this was slanted towards the post-op, your MPFL reconstructions, meniscus repairs, ACLs, those kinds of things. Do I need to go through all of these phases with a hamstring strain, an athlete that's in season, they have a grade 2 intramuscular hamstring strain? Are we going through all these phases? Absolutely not. Like, their fitness level is going to be better than somebody post-op who hasn't done anything in 4 months, right? So this is, yes, you are correct in that, wow, Dan, this is pretty broad. Like, everybody fits in this. No, of course not. Remember, the point of this was something people can do on their own that's objective. They can measure themselves, they can dose themselves, and they don't need me right there to do it for them, but there's structure. That was the point. So do I need to do a hop test to do this for a return to run after a proximal hamstring rupture repair? No, not necessarily. I think, again, this is where your clinically based decision making comes in. Who's in front of you? What are their limitations? How many days in the gym can they give you? What level are they getting back to? Do I give this to a middle-aged dude who's an accountant who tore his ACL in the beer league, C-level softball? No. Remember, this is our high school, college athlete. That's who gets this, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I did think so I'm in my 3rd year of PT school, but I could just definitely see, like, within myself, sort of like almost like a control freak aspect of something like this. Like, okay, this is something that a patient's going to take and carry on their own, like outside the clinic. But I totally get where you're at, like giving them percentages of running and like giving them, I also like how you sort of bring in, and sort of just getting back to where we were in the paper, like, pretty almost like an RPE-ish type of scale for like the intensities they're doing, and then like the volume at which they're performing. You're sort of like highlighting the different aspects of progression that people need to be taken in mind as they're going through it.
Yeah. I tried to do that. Some of the evolution of this, and this is just our nature as PTs, I think. Like, I went to a lot of, so believe it or not, I got my start kind of powerlifting in 7th grade. And I went to a lot of strength conditioning clinics, in PT school and stuff. And I would, you would have these strength coaches for some sport, for some university, and put up, kind enough to share their program, and I have a binder full of stuff, that I've kept over the years. And you look and see, like, when they talk about, their running that they do for sprinting or their run workouts. And I always wondered, well, why'd you start there? Why this distance? Why this amount of sprints? And certainly, is there a degree of, we wrote the numbers out on the runs and then added up the reps and the yardage, if that makes sense. Like, we didn't have we're going to start with 500 yards and then go to 600 and then go to 700. It wasn't that. We wrote the runs out and then added up. Oh, that's what they add up to. So they're admittedly, I know the numbers seem a bit random, admittedly, but that's just what we came up with. And we tried, again, more higher volume, longer distances in the early phases for building that fitness base. But as you see towards the last phases, I mean, those higher distance runs are not in there anymore, because we're doing more short burst sprints, less quantity, because, again, there's going to be a degree of fatigue setting in. And are you really sprinting anymore? Right. So that's why I said return to sprinting, not sprinting. Does that help, or does that answer your question?
Yeah, that totally does. Yeah. And then I feel like just kind of, that volume building base, and then as return to sport and sprinting, it's becoming more specific over time. And yeah, that all makes sense.
remember, some of this too was created for the athlete that also has kind of the God complex of I'm ready to go. And it buys you time because, and that's why I said that this is where our endless tinkering with this and lots of communications via email and phone with Steve, that what it did was is for the cocky types that I'm ready to go. And then they get to stage 2 and they're trucking along and they get to level 3 of stage 2. And they're like, man, that killed me. So that buys us time because they're like, well, you didn't finish the phases. Do you really feel like you're in shape? Like this is a controlled environment, not in the heat, not in the fourth quarter, or not in the second half of a soccer match. Do you really feel like you're ready to go? And it kind of is a humbling experience too. They will get through it because it's just like a return to run progression for a marathoner, right? They get to that point where like, okay, my fitness this is where I'm at right now, but they get back after it and maybe they repeat that phase a couple times, but it bought you another week. Does that make sense? Because like I just cut loose a soccer player 11 months out. She almost 11 months to the day. I mean, I tested her isokinetic test literally Wednesday, and she is where she needs to be. She is in great shape, but it bought me time because she's had a Division I soccer program, and she wanted to be cut loose a while ago, but the program was a humbling experience.
I have question somewhat related to this. So 2 weeks ago, Derek Hansen was on talking about return to sprinting with primarily hamstring based, but I mean, he's worked with.
That's the guy to talk to.
Yeah, he's worked with Kansas City Chiefs. You've had you've worked with them, and I'm sure like there's a lot of parallels in y'all's thought process with kind of these return to sprinting based protocols. Is there any like disagreement that you all have either had personally, or where you're like, I don't know if I would do what he does? Because I know. Go ahead.
Yeah. First off, great going to Derek. I've never talked to him about the program. Did he say anything about it, or is he aware of it?
He didn't say anything about your program. He mainly talked about his kind of his model.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Derek's definitely more of a speed and like actually I've been doing some employee performance reviews, and we were talking yesterday, and one of them we have we call a Run Strong program for our distance runners, but we're having more track people like sprinters get interested, and some of our Run Strong people were asking like, who should I read in regards to sprint training? And I said, that's easy. Derek Hansen, Charlie Francis, and Mike Young. And at least in my view, there might be more out there, but I mean, those are 3 that, off the top of my head that I would look to talk to about sprint training. So yeah, Derek's the guy for that. Yeah, again, he's probably more on the actually on the track, truly sprinting. They get more into probably, low heel recovery or not, and those kind of things. Like, I'm not a sprint coach, and that's why I said I know my limitations here. I certainly know some cues that I work with people on, but if you asked me to analyze I've learned from Derek how to analyze a sprint, but I don't do it like he does, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. I was just curious, since like these 2 weeks are kind of overlapping in similar topics, but also I think your protocol is starting much earlier. And I mean,
yeah, and remember, I'm from a rehab perspective and he's performance side. So eventually I'm transitioning my people to people like him anyway, right? Yeah. So, I'm the guy that's I talk about this a lot. Like, like when I do when I teach on performance enhancement, one of my first talks I give is screening. Because what I want to do is wrap my patient up in a pretty little bow and hand them off to the strength and speed coach, and that they're ready to go. Like, I've addressed all the impairments. Now you make them better, right? So, or you make them a better athlete. I've done the return to sport piece. Now you return them to performance. And that's kind of how the relationship should go, I think.
So with your role within, is it called Ortho Kansas or LMH Health?
Yeah, I mean, Ortho Kansas, LMH Health, yeah.
So are you overseeing all of the clinicians there and kind of like the standard of care? Do they, are you kind of highly recommending this type of protocol for utilizing kind of for some homogeneity with all the clinicians there, or how much?
I mean, I see it laying by the printer a lot. I try not to, I don't want to make people mini Dans. There's a value in letting people, you kind of lead them and they got to figure it out for themselves. There's some things I put my foot down on. I'll give you examples. One of our clinicians, probably a month ago, we sat down and I saw him squatting a little bit early with somebody on a meniscus repair. And I was like, yeah, I'd really like to wait 6 weeks before we do like loaded closed chain stuff on a meniscus repair. And that's something like that. But like I said, they know how I see things. I try and give them a rationale for why I do it. But I'm not one to make people do it my way, if that makes sense. There's a degree of, I think you learn by trial and error and failing. I know we're in a world now where we take failure out of everything. But I think there's some value in tinkering like I have and making mistakes like I have and learning from them.
How big is that clinic, or I guess the group of clinics within that organization?
Well, yeah, this is the mothership where we're at, and it's just shy of 17,000 square feet for our utilization. So, I mean, I have toys at my disposal that I frankly haven't had my whole career. And that's frankly why a lot of the stuff, like with this sprint program that we wanted to do this for, because most of my career was working in small private practices with 3,000, 4,000 square feet. So that's what I think most clinicians are going back to. Yes, you have the therapists that are in Division I environments or pro environments that have space and every resource at their disposal, but a large majority of us are going back to a mom and pop clinic in a strip mall. And you run in parking lots. I mean, I've certainly ran in parking lots. I've ran in fields with people. I've ran in little strips of grass that are, where the landscaping is, like the flat part of landscaping, that's my little strip. And I've done all that. Right. And I think that's why I did this, is for that clinician. The people that got all the toys, they got it easy. I'm worried more about, like I said, the folks that are in a small town in Indiana or Texas that don't have all these things and don't have some structure.
Dan, is there any time in like the rehab or like any situation where you would actually say, hey, we're not going to do this on your own, you're going to do this in the clinic? And then how does that usually play out? Do you just go to the parking lots and stuff, or?
Well, now we have some turfs, we could do it inside, but previously, yeah, I've gone out in the parking lot before. In fact, when I had my private practice, we were on the third floor of an office building, and I couldn't use like medicine ball. I would have thrown medicine balls through the drywall. So, but our parking deck underground had a nice big cinder block wall. I mean, it was just created, I feel, for my facility. And we would go down to the parking deck, and that's where we did all our explosive med ball work, because I had a wide open spot in the park. So you find a way, right? So, I think for me, like when I let them go on this, when I give them this program and they're on their own, I think that I would have watched them run on the treadmill or watched them run in the clinic to make sure there's not like, when you have that, I'm sure you've seen people kind of, gallop a little bit if they don't have that eccentric control. So that's the stuff I addressed before I cut them loose, so to speak. So I've seen them run at least to make sure they're not atrocious with their form and those kinds of things. We've done some dynamic warm-up stuff, high knees, butt kickers, A skips, B skips, those kind of things as a lead into the program to make sure they got at least a baseline level of technique. Does that answer your question, or am I on the right track there?
Yeah. But like, do you ever, like, if someone like doesn't do it on their own or something like that, do you just say, all right, today we're just going to work on the sprint progression?
No, not necessarily, because some of those have, like my soccer player, for example, she was back working out with her team. So she was doing all conditioning activities with her team. And so we would do this basically when she could, when it fit into her schedule, because she was, in school, and she would work with, they had their strength coach they're working out with, and then the practice. So she would be doing some of that, like when the team was doing their contact part of practice, when she wasn't in there, that's when she would do more of these runs, if that makes sense. And then as she got more further along in the her rehab, and I started introducing more full contact practice, I started to come away from the sprint progression, if that makes it, because she was back doing sport specific conditioning.
Yeah, doing the thing and hitting people, kind of.
Right. Again, the decision making, the reactive type, the unplanned stuff. I mean, all this obviously is pre-planned. It's all linear. Again, you get no disagreement from me that isn't sport specific, right? Which is why I felt she was going to get more true sport specific conditioning by being back with her teammates.
Right. Yeah. And
she had structure. She's a club player right now. So they had structured coaches, or structured practices with coaches, days per week, how many days a week they were at it, structure. She had structure. And what I told her with going back to practice was really I think the session RPE thing for most athletes they get their level of RPE, but so many athletes like high school kids really, I think they have a hard time with RPE. So what I use for them is more practice minutes. So what I do, and for me personally, and I just found this useful over the years of doing this, I take them, okay, how many days a week do you practice? Let's just arbitrarily say 60 minutes, 3 times a week. Okay, so that's 180 minutes of practice time a week. When I get them back to practice, I say, I want you to start about 30% of that, and we'll work up from there. So 30% in an 180-minute week practice is about 60 minutes a week. So I'm looking at 20 to 25 minutes, 3 days a week, and we'll build up from there, because that tells us, again, what your load tolerance is for your joint or whatever it is. And then we go up from there. I can always scale back, but if I do too much too soon, again, just like I said before, are you swollen and sore because we just went too far, or you could have went half of that with no problem? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because again, so many of our people are going back because we're out of visits. Mom and dad can't afford it, those kind of things. So we have to give them something to dose and measure themselves.
Yeah. I totally get it.
You go to Division I program or the pros. I mean, they got fitness monitors, and they're measuring, actually their physiologic load with blood assays and those kind of things. Like our high school kids in a small high school don't have that. We have to give them structure, and whether I might be wrong, but again, it seems that they get that. Parents, coaches, the athletes understand that. They can do the math in their head.
Yeah.
How many practice minutes that they're involved in.
Absolutely. Something super easy. And like, I think you kind of hit it on the head. Like, this is just more for like capacity than it is like, the more sport specific stuff. Like, we just want to know they can sprint, they can tolerate sprinting and doing like full speed. If they can tolerate it with their knee, they can tolerate it with their aerobic capacity, and all that stuff. And then the unplanned stuff is more the sport specific, and hey, we'll work on that too. But we want to know if you can run in a straight line fast.
Right. Now, I'll give you an example. So again, making it more sports specific. So again, I don't mean to go back to her, but this soccer player, when she finally hit 90% on her isokinetic testing, she wasn't equal, but she hit 90%. That's when we started the high speed decelerations. So for her sprints, she would do 20 yards, but it would be a hard stop at 20. And then she would kind of jog it out, do her rest, and then do her next sprint. Does that make sense? Because that's what she has to do. Right now, again, she does certainly some sprint and then slow down, but she also does a lot of hard stops too. So I wanted to make sure we got some of that hard decel in as well. Now, I had watched her. We did some hard decels in the clinic. So when she was with me, when I saw her once a week at this point, that's definitely something that we worked on together. And watching her, kind of filming her in her lead up into her decel, looking at that penultimate step. We talk about that now. We weren't talking about this 20 years ago. That's right. That's where it's important to stay current. I say that all the time. Like this, that's amazing. I tell my staff this all the time. Stuff we did 20 years ago that, where we talked about that we don't, do necessarily anymore, so that's certainly something that we know a lot more about, which may explain why we have so many of these contralateral ACL tears, because, the other side is decelling so much more than it should because our involved side isn't decelling at all. So this allows us, again, so when you asked earlier about what my time is spent with, that's what I was doing with her when I could, was watching her, coaching her on her decelerations.
Okay. Useful. Thanks, man.
I hope it helps, man. We're all doing our best. I mean, that's what it is. And tinker with it, republish it and say this program sucks. I mean, somebody's got to start that conversation, right? But yeah. my practice minutes thing I just talked about, the sprint program, remember, all of this is for a majority of clinicians and a majority of our patients who are out of visits, can't afford more. They're on their own. They need structure. And I don't know if I'm correct. All I can say is it's working so far. You modify and adjust. Some people won't work for. There's always the outliers. We know that. But I think most of our patients fit in that bell curve. And again, this is where your decision making comes in, that there's the art of doing this as well. And we can't objectify everything all the time. So I know all of us are doing our best and hoping the program helps you achieve that. But if you use it and you're let's tinker with it. If you're finding that, I don't know what you're getting out of this, but we need to change it. Let's do it. Like I said, you have some humility, you put yourself out there, but hey, maybe it's not so good. Let's redo it.
All right. Yeah, I'm currently drafting a letter to the editor right now, just to.
What kind of garbage are you publishing?
No.
Dan, with going back to the beginning of the hop tests greater than 70%, which hop test were you thinking of, or are you just kind of citing from the other papers? And then I know that, there's some people that think a lot of hop tests are worthless and some do like 10 or 15. So kind of where do you stand within that? And then what is the downside of, let's say you don't do hop tests, but you have the limb symmetry of greater than or equal to 70%, and you just slowly introduce jogging? Like, what are you really missing if you're not doing hop tests?
I think we're in a world now where you have to pick a side, right? There's no gray. And it drives me crazy. You have to be an absolutist, that you hate hop tests or you love hop tests. You can't, I'm a guy that they still tell you something. Like, they still tell you, are they a hip dominant strategy? I mean, there's a girl, she's a college student. She's an MPF, she a patellar dislocator. Not super athletic, but she finally passed the strength criteria, and we got into some just literally bilateral broad jumping, some bounding with a pause. A literally unmitigated biomechanical disaster, like has no ability to absorb, react to the ground at all. And it's funny because she was a swimmer, so she never had to, but she wants to get back to playing like intramural volleyball and things like that. Right. So she still has to learn how to react to the ground. So the hop tests that I use the standard ones. We use the triple hop, we use the single leg hop, the medial lateral certainly tells us a little bit about frontal plane control. Those are the minimum baselines. I use more than that for like our ACL testing, but I think those still tell you something. I think the triple hop tells you, I talk to my clinicians, and when I speak at meetings about what does it sound like? Do they sound like a bunny rabbit, or they sound like they got a 12-year-old on their back when they land? I think that tells us how they react to the ground. It tells us how elastic they are. I can't quantify the audible pitch, but I tell you, you can hear the difference. When they're landing hard, they spend more time on the ground, they hit the ground and they wobble at the knee and then they get off it. That's concerning to me. So there's value there. And that then informs our programming, right? That tells us where we need to direct our efforts when we actually give them stuff in the weight room, right? So there's value in it, but do I say that if they pass the hop test, that's what I need to see? Absolutely not. So does that help answer your question? It's a piece of the puzzle. And like I say all the time, I literally spoke at a meeting in Omaha for a group 2 weeks ago. The hop test stuff and the strength, that is the minimum necessary to start the discussion of returning to sport. Because if you fail at a pre-planned, if you don't look, darn near perfect on a pre-planned hop test with no change of direction, no technical piece, no having to react to an opponent. If you're garbage there, what do you think is going to happen on the field? Right? So it's a piece of putting a complex puzzle together, but I do believe there is some value. If you don't want, it's one of those, I say this all the time, and I got this from one of my mentors, Rob Panarello. Rob has always said, and I appreciate it about him. I mean, the guy has forgot more than I know. He always says, this is the way I do it. If you don't want to do it, then don't do it. I mean, that's really, I've kind of come to that evolution, because no matter what, there's going to be somebody that's going to cross their arms and say, well, I don't do it. Well, then don't do it that way. I don't care. I'm just telling you, you asked me to be on here, and this is, I sharing you with what I'm doing. If you don't want to do it, if you think I'm a charlatan, that's okay. I really am okay with it.
Yeah, and the reason I ask is, I mean, I have zero experience working from stage, from day one post-op to all the way return to sport, because I'm still in clinicals and I have zero like ties to any of it. That's why I bring on a ton of people to give perspective. But I've heard kind of like the spectrum of the argument, or not even the argument, but like people's preference.
Yeah, and I know, like, my good buddy Lenny Macrina. You guys probably know Lenny. He's big on social media. Lenny's a really smart guy, and he's a friend of mine. Lenny is not a big hop test guy, and we go back and forth about that. And it's always, I love the Socratic debates on things like that. One of my mentors, George Davies, had the privilege of working with George. I mean, he's the true godfather. George is a big believer in hop tests, and he's said before to Lenny's face, he disagrees. So it doesn't mean Lenny's right. Doesn't mean Lenny's wrong. Doesn't mean George is right. Doesn't mean George is wrong. But I think it's always great to hear opposing perspectives. And I know we're in a world now where you huddle up in your tribe that see the world like you do and those kind of things. But I think in this case, it behooves you to hear different perspectives and formulate your own opinion. And I do agree, by the way, that it's a major flaw in our PT education that, students don't get to see people beginning to end, that you get to see people in chunks. So I saw an ACL for weeks 1 through 4, but then I went on to my next clinical. I saw them, weeks 12 through 20, but then I left. But I never got to see weeks 1 to 12 on this person. So I agree. That's a real challenge for new clinicians. No doubt about it.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I'm driving way back from a clinical right now, but taking into account, just wondering how much you do take into account when returning people to sport, like how athletic or what type of player they were pre-injury. Because thinking back to like myself as an athlete, like I was not an athletic person whatsoever, like compared to like basketball players you see who can just make everything look flawless and effortless. And so like right now I'm trying to mimic things in the clinic, demonstrate exercise as athletes, and I'm thinking I'm not even coming back from an injury, and I am like showing them hop tests and stuff like that, and my sound quality movement is terrible. But when thinking back to like if I was an athlete coming back from an injury, how much would the clinician be taking into account? Like I landed loud on a hop test and single leg hops like that pre-injury. So what is my baseline level going back? Are you trying to make it more effortless and a smoother landing than before, or are you just trying to get me back to baseline?
Well, without knowing a baseline, you don't know that. And how many of our patients, I mean, I would say I have 0% of patients I have a baseline on. I mean, we test now because I have isokinetics, we do, for every patient that we have the ability to do the other leg baseline test after their ACL tear, we do that on, but if you don't have a baseline, they're non-athletic. If they tell you, well, I want to get back to playing intramural softball or intramural basketball, well, I still need to make sure that they land okay. So I know they may be the most unathletic person ever, and they were a mathlete in high school and got a 58 on their ACT. But if they're telling you want to get back to basketball with their buddies, I still need to make sure that they look okay. Now, do they have to have a specific progression that a Division I basketball player would have for a flagship program like Kentucky, Duke, or Kansas? I think it's an entirely different discussion. So I don't think that you abandon the rules necessarily just because of who's in front of you. Let me give you an example that may articulate this better. I have a 53-year-old woman right now who had an allograft ACL, and she is an avid horseback rider, has zero interest in doing anything athletic other than riding her horses and taking care of her horses. I'm not hop testing her. Why? I don't have to. She doesn't need to. Are we doing a little bit of, at least some, I want to make sure she can jump and land. Like if she misses a step in her house, yes, we're doing that. But all I need from her is her strength test and her motion to be good. And can she get on or off her horse? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. That example helped illustrate it a little bit better on the continuum of it and going back to their exact demands of what they want to go to.
Am I going to give my the girl I told you, the college student who was a swimmer who dislocated her patella that wants to play intramurals, am I giving her this return to run progression, return to sprint progression? Absolutely not. Because she just wants to. I was like, do you want to get back to jogging? No, I like going to the rec center with my friends and working out. Okay, she can work out just fine. She wants to play. Yeah, so we'll work on some bounding, some lateral bounding. We'll work on some run stop, some change of direction stuff. We'll shoot around a little bit in our clinic, just to make sure she feels confident. But I can't say she's going to put forth the effort to sprint down the court and drive hard to the hole, right? So I mean, it's just you have to get to know your patients a bit, like what their bandwidth is, and like I said several times, who's in front of you.
A lot of times when I perform an exercise or a hop test in front of a patient and I'll land, I'm tipping over. I'm like, hey, be more athletic than me. And then
hey man, I've had one knee operated on 4 times. It is an unmitigated disaster. I wear an unloader brace underneath my dad pants in the clinic. My patients know that I've had 5 knee operations between both knees. So am I the spry, elastic gazelle that I was right out of PT school? Absolutely not. But I show them that I describe what I want to see, and my single leg hop might be 7 inches, but they know what they're supposed to do. Again, your job is not to be an Olympic triple jumper. Your job is to tell them what they need to do and analyze when they do it. That's your job.
All right. I know you have to leave soon. So does anyone have any final questions before we wrap up?
Yeah, I have more of I guess a broader question, not directly related to return to sprinting. But you've mentioned that a lot of what you know is just based on tons of experience and getting a large N, which makes a lot of sense. And I feel like some PTs do a really good job of maximizing every patient experience and learning over time. Well, some PTs don't grow as much from each experience. So do you have any tips or tricks for tracking patient outcomes over the years so you can really see over the years which treatments tend to correlate with better outcomes?
Great question, man. I would really love to know how, when I came out of PT school, I was a little, I kind of had the ego trip of, I got my ACLs back in under 6 months, because remember, this was in the 90s when they were talking about accelerated rehabs and getting people back in 4 months, between 4 and 6. And I took pride in sending people back out before the 6. I did a good job. I got them back before 6. The charlatans, the people that aren't any good, they take 6 months or longer. And now again, it was what we knew at the time, but I mean, I realize how reckless that was now. I'd love to know how those knees are doing. Did they re-tear? When you go from city to city and work and people go live their lives, maybe the patient moved away. I would love to know that. With that being said, on as far as tracking outcomes, it's hard to do if you don't know, if you don't follow them up. I mean, some athletes I've kept in touch with that lasted fine. One of my athletes I was a little more aggressive with. She went to a Division I school for volleyball. She then played professionally overseas. I get a random text message from her 3 or 4 years ago, probably 10 years after she tore the one that I rehabbed, she tore her other one in a volleyball game overseas. So, I mean, that's a it was a contact situation. I don't think we could have done anything about it. But yeah, I would love to know. And I think that you do the best you can with the resources you have. You inform yourself, like, this, we used to say 85% strength going back to sport. We know now that that's probably not enough. I mean, I tell patients, that's what they used to say. Do you want to be 85% of what you were before? I want to get as close to symmetry on strength as we can. And I stretch out rehab as long as I am able to, as much as they'll give me, right? So I think you do the best you can. You are informed about what the best criteria are. There's been that, there's been so many papers on this. I'm going to butcher the name, but Chryzistis has the 6 criteria to reduce your risk by almost 80%. You combine those in all the studies, and that's why being informed is so important. And you can put this kind of amalgam of tests and things to look at to do the best you can for your athlete, but then eventually you got to cut them loose. And do they you hope they don't re-tear, but we're all doing the best we can, I think, with the resources that we have. Limited visits, mom and dad are out of money. Or mom and dad are just say, this is enough. We are playing this weekend. You know what I mean? Like you do the best you can. Document like crazy that you recommended that they do or don't do something to cover your butt. Especially if the parent's like, well, can they play this weekend? I don't recommend it. You haven't played at all and you're going back to play in a showcase. I don't think that's a good idea. Write that down, because if something bad happens, you can say that, hey, I told them they shouldn't. Does that answer your question? I kind of went a couple different directions there, but
Yeah, I don't think I did the best job of conveying what I was trying to ask there. I mean, that's definitely good information. I guess I was more trying to ask, like, how do you compare, like, as objectively as possible, like what you were doing 10 years ago versus what you're doing now, and like how, like, the outcomes are different with what you were doing 10 years ago versus like how you're treating now. Because I feel like that can be hard to do because there's a lot of like blurring that goes on in our minds.
there's also evolution of care. I'll give you a shoulder example. So in the year 2000-ish, 2001, we heard about GERD and the sleeper stretch, and any loss of internal rotation of the shoulder, you cranked into the sleeper stretch. Well, now we know that, there's humeral head retroversion, that you might be creating a instability in the shoulder by cranking on it, by creating more motion. We know more about the total rotation concept, or the total range of motion concept now. I don't sleeper stretch very much anymore. I mean, it's pretty rare. So what I'm trying to get at is that that's where the whole idea of, boy, I was probably reckless coming out of PT school or pushing an ACL to get back to make me feel good about, I got you back in under 6 months. But at the time, that's what the data said. I don't know if they tore. I don't know if they loosened up. I don't know if the allografts, because there's a lot of allografts in the 90s. That was kind of the sexy thing to do. Did my allografts, did they stretch out over time because I was more aggressive than I should have been? I don't know. So it's hard to answer your question, Cameron, unless I demanded people do, surveys 2 and 5 years out. I don't know those things, but what I'm trying to say is keep up with the literature, evolve your thinking. I've evolved my thinking on rotator cuff repairs. That's another thing I say all the time. I am thrilled when my rotator cuff repairs are stiff. I'm thrilled. I'm more concerned if my rotator cuff repair has a floppy arm 4 weeks out of surgery. That's very concerning to me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, and like I said, it's hard to answer your question because in absence of tracking this data in a database where you like the studies where they send out a survey, at 1 year, 2 years, and 5 years, I've never done that in my life.
Like what are your
What's
thoughts?
that?
What are your thoughts on like photo or just those things like that?
I've never used it. I know what it is. I love the idea of tracking outcomes. I don't know a great way how to do that for most clinicians. I know like our surgeon that does our ACLs. I mean, he does track his outcomes, his re-tear rates and those kind of things. But again, what if people move away and he doesn't know? So those are the people that he's just aware of, right? So that's a hard question, Nate, because unless you're at a center that really aggressively pursues this and they got a team of researchers to do it, that's hard to do. That's not making an excuse. It just comes down to bandwidth, right? If you have enough resources to do it.
Yeah, I don't know of a lot of clinics that do stuff like that. Maybe like the large scale, I think like the Athleticos or the ATIs might do it, but I don't really know of like a lot of mom and pop shops that are trying to track their data. They're just trying to constantly improve, kind of like you.
Well, that's what capital equity does when you got money to do those kind of things. But I say that, but hey, every ACL gets an IKDC. They do that. We know that what the threshold for that should be. Everybody gets an ACL RSI. They all do that. And again, you do the best you can. I want to see that RSI be as high as it can. I want to see the IKDC be at a minimum of an 87. Before we're looking at return to sport, and I hope they are. And again, you do the best you can, and you hope you never see him again.
Okay, one last question because Nate brought it into my head and I can't not see it. Have you ever been told you look like Matt Damon?
Yes. Hey, hun, still got it. So it's funny. So my thing, yes, I have more times than my wife cares to count. I appreciate it. Thank you. But whenever I hear it, my thing is, because it drives her crazy, I'll call her and I'll just yell, "Still got it." And I hang up the phone. So that's why I had to yell up. So sorry about that. I had to yell
No,
up.
that's awesome.
That still got it. But yeah, no, I've heard that ever since Good Will Hunting came out in 1997. I've heard it, and what's cool is you hear it from dudes, so you know it's real. Because dudes just tend not to compliment each other, right?
Right.
So, and they're like, "Yeah, I don't see it. Maybe you're kind of a fat Matt Damon, but or something like that." But yeah. Yeah, I have heard that. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Well, I appreciate you coming on and for being able to come on this early, but this was great, and enjoy the weekend and the kids' sporting events.
Yeah, thanks. You guys too. I appreciate accommodating. I'm sorry. I'll come on another time. I love talking shop. Email me if you have any questions. Certainly, Daniel S. Lorenz at Gmail. Happy, or reach out to me on Twitter, KC Rehab Guy. Happy to answer any questions you have. I hope it gave you some perspective, maybe made you think, maybe made you disagree a bit, maybe ruffled some feathers. That's kind of what we do it for. And publish something and tell me that I'm wrong. I'd love to see it.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dan.
Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend. We'll see you.
Bye.